The acrid stench of burnt circuitry and stale sweat clung to Vex's nostrils as she crouched in the shadows of a dilapidated alleyway. Her unenhanced eyes strained against the gloom, desperately seeking any sign of pursuit. The distant wail of sirens pierced the night, a haunting reminder of the chaos they'd left behind. "Coast's clear," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of neon signs and hover traffic above. "Let's move." Arden emerged from behind a rusted dumpster, his lanky frame hunched with exhaustion. Unlike the glowing irises and perfect physiques of the gen mods that dominated their world, Arden's eyes were a dull brown, his skin marred by acne scars. Just another basic, trying to survive in a world that had left them behind. They slipped out onto the street, weaving through the late-night crowd. Gen mods strutted past, their engineered beauty almost painful to behold. Some sported bioluminescent tattoos that pulsed in time with the throbbing bass from nearby clubs. Others had eyes that shifted color like mood rings, broadcasting their emotions for all to see. Vex kept her head down, acutely aware of how she and Arden stood out. No perfect skin, no enhanced strength or intelligence, just two unmodified humans, relics of a bygone era. "We should have taken the tunnels," Arden muttered, flinching as a gen mod brushed past him. Vex shook her head. "Too risky. The purists have eyes everywhere down there." The purists. Once, they'd been allies in the fight for unmodified rights. Now they were just another faction in the endless struggle for power, willing to sacrifice anyone who got in their way. A holographic billboard flickered to life overhead, bathing the street in a sickly green glow. A perfect face smiled down at them, promising genetic perfection in 3 easy payments. Vex felt her stomach churn. "Almost there," she said, more to herself than Arden. The safe house was just a few blocks away. If they could make it without incident, they might actually survive the night. A scream shattered the relative quiet of the street. Vex's head snapped up, her body tensing for a fight. A gen mod woman stood frozen in place, her augmented eyes wide with terror as she pointed at Vex and Arden. "Basics," she shrieked. "Unmodified scum." The crowd parted like a startled school of fish, leaving Vex and Arden exposed. In an instant, the street erupted into chaos. Gen mods scrambled to get away, their enhanced reflexes carrying them to safety in the blink of an eye. Others, emboldened by their genetic superiority, advanced menacingly. "Run!" Vex grabbed Arden's arm, yanking him into motion. They sprinted down the street, dodging hover cars and leaping over discarded SciFi food containers. The sound of pursuit grew louder behind them, a mix of angry shouts and the rhythmic thud of enhanced muscles propelling their hunters forward. Vex's lungs burned, her unmodified body pushed to its limits. Arden wheezed beside her, already falling behind. She gritted her teeth and pushed harder. They couldn't afford to be caught, not when they were so close to their goal. A sleek hoverbike cut them off, its rider a towering gen mod with arms like steel cables. He grinned, revealing sharpened teeth that gleamed in the neon light. "End of the line, basics," he growled. Vex didn't hesitate. She dropped low, sweeping her leg out in a move that would have been laughably slow to enhanced reflexes. But the gen mod, so confident in his superiority, hadn't bothered to activate his combat mods. Her foot connected with his ankle, sending him tumbling from the bike. "Arden, go!" she shouted, scrambling onto the hoverbike. He clambered on behind her, his arms wrapping tightly around her waist as she gunned the engine. The bike shot forward, weaving through the crowded street with a grace that belied Vex's lack of enhancements. Behind them, the fallen gen mod roared in fury. Vex risked a glance back and saw his eyes glowing an angry red. Combat mods fully engaged now. They had seconds at best before he caught up. "Hold on!" she yelled, banking the bike hard to the right. They shot down a narrow alley, the walls so close that Arden had to tuck his knees in to avoid scraping against the grime-covered bricks. The bike's anti-grav generators whined in protest as Vex pushed it beyond its intended limits. They burst out of the alley onto a wider street, but their reprieve was short-lived. A police cruiser materialized out of the night, its siren wailing as it gave chase. Vex swore under her breath. The cops were in the pocket of the Gen Mod corporations, always eager to make an example of basics who stepped out of line. "We're not going to make it to the safe house," Arden shouted over the wind. "What's the plan?" Vex's mind raced. They needed a place to hide, somewhere the gen mods and their enhanced senses couldn't track them. Her eyes darted across the cityscape, searching for any sign of salvation, and then she saw it. A dilapidated building on the corner, its windows dark and boarded up. The old library, abandoned years ago when everything went digital. "Hang on," she called back, banking the bike toward their new destination. The tires screeched as they hit the pavement, the anti-grav giving out under the strain. Vex and Arden tumbled off, rolling across the cracked sidewalk as the bike careened into a wall and exploded in a shower of sparks. Ignoring the pain that flared through her body, Vex scrambled to her feet and hauled Arden up. They sprinted for the library's boarded-up entrance, the sound of pursuit growing ever closer. "It's locked." Arden tugged frantically at the chain securing the door. Vex pulled a small device from her pocket, a relic from the days before biometric locks became standard. She jammed it into the keyhole, and for a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, the chains fell away. They burst through the door, slamming it shut behind them. The musty smell of old paper and dust assaulted their senses as they stood in the darkened lobby, chests heaving. "Block the door," Vex gasped, already moving to drag a heavy desk across the entrance. Arden joined her, and together they created a makeshift barricade, just in time. Something heavy slammed against the door, making it shudder in its frame. Angry voices filtered through, demanding they surrender. "What now?" Arden asked, his voice trembling. Vex's eyes had adjusted to the gloom, taking in the rows upon rows of bookshelves that stretched into the darkness. "We hide," she said, "and we pray they don't burn this place down to flush us out." They moved deeper into the library, the sounds of their pursuers growing fainter. Dust swirled around their feet with each step, and the air grew thick with the scent of aging paper. It was like stepping into another world, one untouched by the genetic revolution that had reshaped society. Vex ran her hand along a shelf, feeling the spines of real physical books. Such things were rare now, replaced by neural implants that could download entire libraries directly into enhanced brains. But here, surrounded by the accumulated knowledge of generations, she felt a glimmer of hope. "Look at all this," Arden whispered, awe evident in his voice. "There's so much here that the gen mods have forgotten." Vex nodded. "Knowledge is power," she said. "Maybe that's why they abandoned this place. Can't have the basics getting ideas above their station." A crash echoed from the front of the building, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Their pursuers had broken through. "This way," Vex hissed, pulling Arden toward a spiral staircase that led to the upper floors. They ascended as quietly as possible, wincing at every creak of the old metal steps. The second floor was a maze of reading rooms and study carrels. Vex led them to a small office tucked away in a corner, its door hanging off rusted hinges. Inside, a thick layer of dust covered everything, undisturbed for years. "We can't stay here forever," Arden said as they huddled behind an overturned desk. "They'll find us eventually." Vex knew he was right. The gen mod's enhanced senses would make short work of their hiding place given enough time. But as she looked around the abandoned office, an idea began to form. "Maybe we don't have to hide," she said slowly. "Maybe we can fight back." Arden looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "With what? In case you haven't noticed, we're not exactly equipped to take on superhumans." Vex's eyes fell on an old computer terminal tucked away in the corner. Unlike the sleek, holographic interfaces of modern tech, this was a relic from before the genetic revolution. But if it still worked. "Knowledge is power," she repeated, moving toward the terminal. "And I bet this place has knowledge that even the gen mods have forgotten." She brushed away the dust, revealing a keyboard made of actual plastic keys. It took a few tries, but eventually, the ancient machine sputtered to life, its screen casting a pale blue glow over their faces. "What are you doing?" Arden asked, peering over her shoulder. Vex's fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating through file systems that predated neural interfaces. "Looking for anything we can use. Building schematics, old security protocols, anything that might give us an edge." As she worked, the sounds of their pursuers grew closer. Heavy footsteps echoed through the library, accompanied by the crash of overturned furniture. They were running out of time, There! Vex exclaimed, her eyes lighting up as she found what she was looking for. The library used to have an emergency evacuation system, underground tunnels leading to safe houses across the city. Arden leaned in, hope dawning on his face. Can we access them? Vex nodded, already memorizing the access points. There's an entrance in the basement. If we can reach it. A voice cut through the darkness, unnaturally loud and clear, the product of enhanced vocal cords. We know you're here, Basics. There's no escape. Come out now and we'll make it quick. Vex and Arden exchanged glances. The gen mods were closer than they'd thought. We need a distraction, Vex whispered. Her eyes fell on the bookshelves lining the walls, and a desperate plan formed in her mind. Fire! Arden's eyes widened. You can't be serious. This place is our only chance, Vex finished for him. She pulled a small lighter from her pocket, another relic from a bygone era. We start a fire, use the smoke for cover, and make a run for the basement. For a moment, Arden looked like he might argue. Then his jaw set in determination. Do it. Vex flicked the lighter, the small flame dancing in the darkness. She hesitated for a split second, acutely aware of the history they were about to destroy. Then she touched the flame to a shelf of ancient paperbacks. The fire caught quickly, fueled by decades of dust and dry paper. Smoke began to fill the room, acrid and thick. Vex and Arden pulled their shirts over their noses, eyes watering as they crouched low. Now! Vex shouted, grabbing Arden's hand. They burst out of the office, staying low to avoid the worst of the smoke. Behind them, shouts of alarm rose from their pursuers as the fire spread with unnatural speed. They raced down the spiral staircase, the metal hot under their hands. The main floor was a chaos of smoke and flickering flames. Gen mods stumbled about, their enhanced senses overwhelmed by the assault on their augmented nervous systems. Vex led them toward the back of the library, following the mental map she had memorized from the old computer. They dodged falling debris and leapt over spreading pools of fire, their lungs burning with every breath. Finally, they reached a nondescript door marked Maintenance. Vex shoulder-checked it open, revealing a set of stairs leading down into darkness. They plunged ahead, the sounds of chaos fading behind them as they descended into the bowels of the library. The basement was a maze of storage rooms and utility corridors. Vex's eyes strained in the gloom, searching for any sign of the secret passage. Above, they could hear the building groan as the fire consumed it. There! Arden pointed to a section of wall that looked slightly different from the rest. A seam, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. Vex ran her hands along the wall, feeling for any kind of mechanism. Her fingers found a small indentation and she pressed hard. With a hiss of long-disused hydraulics, a section of the wall slid away, revealing a dark tunnel beyond. They didn't hesitate, plunging into the unknown just as the sound of pursuit echoed down the stairs behind them. The door slid shut, plunging them into total darkness. For a moment, they stood still, catching their breath in the oppressive blackness. Then Vex fumbled with her lighter, the small flame barely illuminating the narrow tunnel. Which way? Arden asked, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Vex consulted her mental map. Left. If the plans were right, this should lead us to a safe house in the old industrial district. They set off, the tunnel stretching endlessly before them. The air was stale and damp, carrying the musty scent of long-abandoned spaces. Their footsteps echoed softly, a constant reminder of how exposed they were if the gen mods managed to access the tunnels. As they walked, Vex's mind raced. They'd escaped for now, but for how long? The gen mods would be out for blood after this, and two unmodified humans couldn't hide forever in a world built for the enhanced. We need a plan, she said, breaking the silence. A real one, not just running and hiding. Arden was quiet for a moment. What about the others? The unmodified communities living off the grid? Vex shook her head, even though Arden couldn't see it in the darkness. Too risky. We'd be leading the gen mods right to them. Then what? We can't keep this up forever, Vex. Sooner or later, they'll catch us. She knew he was right. They needed something big, something that would level the playing field between the unmodified and the gen mods. But what? As if in answer to her unspoken question, the tunnel opened up into a larger chamber. Vex raised the lighter, its flame revealing rows of old computer servers and dusty monitoring equipment. "What is this place?" Arden asked, running his hand along a console. Vex moved deeper into the room, her eyes widening as she took in the faded labels on the equipment. "It's some kind of data center," she said. "But these machines, they're ancient, predating the genetic revolution by decades." She brushed away a layer of dust from one of the servers, revealing a faded logo. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized it, the symbol of a long-defunct government agency that had once regulated genetic research. "Arden," she said slowly, "I think we just stumbled onto something big." He moved to join her, peering at the logo. "What do you mean?" Vex's mind was racing, connecting dots she hadn't even known existed. These servers might contain information from before the corporations took control. Data on the early days of genetic modification, maybe even. "Even what?" Arden pressed. She met his eyes, a fierce light burning in her own. "Even a way to level the playing field. If we can access this data, we might find a weakness in the GenMod's perfect genetics, a flaw they've covered up all these years." Arden's expression shifted from confusion to cautious hope. "You really think that's possible?" Vex nodded, already moving to examine the old computers. "It's our best shot. If we can find proof that the GenMods aren't as perfect as they claim, it could change everything. Rally the unmodified, maybe even turn some of the less extreme GenMods to our side." Arden's eyes lit up with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "All right, let's do it. But how do we even start? This tech is ancient." Vex cracked her knuckles, a determined grin spreading across her face. "Lucky for us, I had a thing for vintage tech back in the day. Let's see what we're working with." For hours, they toiled in the dim light of Vex's lighter, coaxing life back into machines that hadn't run in decades. Dust-clogged fans whirred to life, and long-dormant hard drives began to spin. The air filled with the soft hum of awakening electronics, a sound that sent a thrill of anticipation through Vex's body. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of troubleshooting and jury-rigging, a monitor flickered to life. Green text scrolled across the screen, a command prompt from another era. "We're in," Vex breathed, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Now let's see what secrets you're hiding." As she delved deeper into the system, Arden kept watch at the tunnel entrance, alert for any sign of pursuit. But the only sounds were the gentle hum of the computers and their own bated breath. Suddenly, Vex let out a gasp. "Arden, you need to see this." He hurried over, peering at the screen over her shoulder. "What am I looking at?" "Project Prometheus," Vex said, her voice tight with excitement. "It was the precursor to modern genetic modification. But look at this data. There are side effects they never made public. Genetic instabilities, decreased lifespans, even potential mental degradation in later generations." Arden's eyes widened. "Are you saying the GenMods are flawed?" Vex finished. "Potentially fatally so. The corporations must have covered this up when they took control of the research." She worked feverishly, copying as much data as she could onto a portable drive shed cobbled together from spare parts. "This is it, Arden. This is how we fight back." Just as the last of the files finished transferring, a distant sound echoed through the tunnel. Footsteps, growing closer. "They've found us," Arden hissed, panic edging into his voice. Vex snatched up the drive, shoving it deep into her pocket. "We need to move, now!" They sprinted down the far tunnel, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind them. The passage twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the forgotten underground of the city. Suddenly, the tunnel opened up into a vast chamber. Ancient subway tracks stretched out before them, disappearing into the darkness in both directions. "Which way?" Arden gasped, his eyes darting between the two paths. Vex's mind raced, trying to orient herself based on the old map she'd seen. "Left," she decided. "It should lead us toward the outskirts." They set off down the tracks, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Behind them, shouts of their pursuers grew closer. As they ran, Vex's mind whirled with possibilities. The data they'd uncovered could change everything, but only if they could get it to the right people. They needed a way to broadcast it, to make sure every unmodified and even the GenMods themselves knew the truth. A plan began to form in her mind, audacious and desperate in equal measure. "Arden," she panted as they ran, "I have an idea, but it's risky as hell." He glanced at her, a wry smile on his face despite their dire situation. "Riskier than what we're doing now." She nodded grimly. "We need to go to the central broadcast tower." Arden nearly stumbled in shock. "Are you insane? That's in the heart of GenMod territory?" "Exactly," Vex said. "It's the last place they'd expect us to go. And it's our best shot at getting this information out to everyone." For a moment, Arden was silent, the only sound their ragged breathing and pounding footsteps. Then he nodded. "All right, I'm with you." They emerged from the subway system in the pre-dawn light, the streets eerily quiet. The central broadcast tower loomed in the distance, a gleaming spire that dominated the skyline. Getting there was a gauntlet of close calls and narrow escapes. They dodged patrols, hacked into security systems, and at one point even disguised themselves as maintenance workers to slip past a checkpoint. Finally, they stood at the base of the tower, its smooth surface stretching impossibly high above them. "Now comes the hard part," Vex said, eyeing the security entrance. But before they could make a move, a voice called out behind them. "That's far enough, Basics." They turned to find themselves surrounded by a squad of GenMods, their enhanced bodies coiled and ready for action. At their head stood a man Vex recognized from countless propaganda broadcasts, Helios, the face of the genetic revolution himself. "I must admit I'm impressed you made it this far," Helios said, his perfect features twisted in a sneer. "But your little rebellion ends here." Vex's hand tightened around the drive in her pocket. Everything they'd fought for, all the lives at stake, it all came down to this moment. "You're right, Helios," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "It does end here, but not the way you think." With a nod to Arden, she pulled out the drive and held it high. "We know the truth about Project Prometheus, about the flaws in your perfect genetics. And in about 10 seconds, so will everyone else." Helios' eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in fury. "Impossible. You're bluffing." Vex allowed herself a small, fierce smile. "Am I? You might want to check your feeds." As if on cue, every screen in the plaza lit up with data scrolling across it. The GenMods' faces twisted in confusion, then horror as they began to process what they were seeing. Vex had gambled everything on one last hack, using the tower's own systems against it. The truth was out, impossible to contain. Helios lunged forward with inhuman speed, but Arden was ready. He tackled the GenMod leader, buying Vex the precious seconds she needed to complete the upload. Chaos erupted in the plaza as the implications of the data sank in. GenMods turned on each other, some trying to stop the broadcast, others defending it. In the confusion, Vex and Arden slipped away, disappearing into the awakening city. As the sun rose over the skyline, casting long shadows across the streets, Vex allowed herself to breathe. They'd done it. The truth was out there, and nothing would ever be the same. "What now?" Arden asked as they watched the city come alive with the news. Vex looked out at the horizon, where the first hints of a new day were breaking. "Now," she said, "we build a world where everyone has a chance, modified or not." She knew the fight was far from over. There would be resistance, denial, maybe even violence as society grappled with this new reality. But for the first time in years, there was hope, real, tangible hope for a future where genetic modification was a choice, not a necessity for survival. As they set off into the uncertain future, Vex felt a weight lift from her shoulders. They had struck a blow for equality, for the right of all humans to determine their own destiny. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not as GenMods or Basics, but as people united in the struggle for a better world. The genetic revolution had begun anew, but this time on terms that gave everyone a fighting chance.